My son and daughter-in-law skipped my wife's funeral, calling it a trivial event, something to get over with as quickly as possible. My hand froze. The next morning, a neighbor showed me a photo of the two of them laughing aboard a luxury yacht, while my wife had not even been buried yet. 3 days later, they called demanding $40,000 from the sale of my house. That was when I realized the funeral was only the beginning of their betrayal. To everyone already here, I'm grateful for each one of you. Do me a favor and leave a comment. What city or country are you joining from today? It means the world to see where these stories land. Fair warning. Parts of this story are fictional, built carefully for meaning and impact. Any resemblance to specific people or places is coincidental, but the message woven through every word, that part is absolutely worth your time. My name is Walter Grayson, and I am 68 years old. I have spent most of those years working with my hands, building cabinets, laying floors, shaping raw wood into something that would outlast the man who made it. People in Millhaven, Pennsylvania knew my name because of what I built, not because of what I said. I never minded that. I was always more comfortable with a hammer than with words. But there are moments in a man's life when words are the only thing left. When the wood is gone, the hammer is put down, and all you have is what you heard in a hallway that you were never meant to hear. This is one of those moments. It was the first week of September 2025. The leaves on Birchwood Lane had just started to turn that early gold that shows up before you're ready for it, before you've had enough of summer. My wife, Eleanor Grayson, had been gone for 4 days. We called her Ellie. Everyone called her Ellie. She had been a school teacher for 30 years and had the kind of patience that made you feel, no matter who you were, that you were worth her time. She was 65 when the doctors found the cancer. Pancreatic. Stage 4. The kind of diagnosis that doesn't come with options, only with a timeline. 6 weeks from that afternoon in the oncologist's office to the afternoon I stood in Callaway Funeral Home on Maple Street, my hand resting on the edge of her casket. I had chosen alderwood for the casket, light-colored smooth grain. Ellie always preferred light colors. She said dark rooms made her feel like the walls were listening. I picked every panel myself, ran my hands over each one before I approved it. It was the last thing I could build for her, even if I wasn't the one doing the building. The viewing room smelled like white lilies. The light was that soft yellow that funeral homes use, warm enough to be kind, dim enough to be honest. I stood at the casket for a long time, my hand on the wood, not saying anything, not praying out loud, just being there the way you are when you don't know what else to do but refuse to leave. That's when I heard it. Preston. My son was in the hallway just beyond the viewing room door. He was 38 years old, tall like me, with the kind of jaw that made people trust him before he opened his mouth. I could hear him talking to his wife, Vivien. His voice wasn't loud. He wasn't shouting. He was using the tone of a man discussing logistics, flat, efficient, unbothered. "She's gone," he said. "Let's just get this over with. Don't spend more than we have to." I did not turn around. My hand tightened on the edge of the casket. Just slightly. The wood was cool under my palm, and I focused on that. The grain, the smoothness, the weight of what I was touching, because if I turned around and looked at my son's face right then, I don't know what I would have done. I had heard Preston be careless before. I had heard him be dismissive, impatient, too busy for things that deserved more of his time. But this was different. This was not carelessness. This was the voice of a man who had already moved on from a woman who had not yet been put into the ground. His mother. My wife. The woman who had packed his school lunches until he was 13 and refused to let anyone else do it because she said, "He needs to know someone thought about him this morning." That woman was 4 feet away from him in a casket made of alderwood, and he was talking about cost control. I stood there and breathed. In, out. In, out. The way you breathe when you're on a job and something goes wrong, and you know that panicking will only make it worse. I looked at Ellie's face, still composed like she was working something out in her mind, and I thought, "Did you know, sweetheart? Did you see this coming?" Preston came into the room a few minutes later. He was wearing a dark suit, hair-combed expression, arranged into something that looked from a distance like grief. He shook hands with the funeral director. He accepted condolences from the neighbors who had come early. He nodded at the right moments and said, "Thank you for coming," in a voice that carried exactly the right amount of weight. I watched him do all of it. I watched him perform the role of a grieving son, the way an actor performs a role he has played many times, competent, convincing, and completely empty behind the eyes. "Dad," he said, when he finally came to stand beside me at the casket. He put a hand on my shoulder. Firm. Appropriate. "She looks peaceful." My throat tightened. Not from grief, not in that moment. From something colder and harder that I didn't have a name for yet. "She does," I said. That was all I said. Vivien came over shortly after. She was 35, sharp-featured, the kind of woman who always seemed to be calculating something just behind her smile. She hugged me briefly, said she was sorry, said Ellie had been a wonderful woman. She smelled like expensive perfume, and her arms were gone before the words had finished landing. I stood at that casket until the viewing ended. I shook hands and received hugs and said thank you more times than I could count. Pastor Owen Tully, our minister at Millhaven Community Church, a steady man of 62 who had known Ellie since she joined the choir in 1991, stayed beside me for most of the evening. He didn't talk much. He just stood there solid as a post, the way good people do when they understand that their presence matters more than anything they could say. By the time the last guest left, my feet ached, and my chest felt like something had been sitting on it since morning. Preston found me by the door. "We'll see you tomorrow, Dad," he said. His tone was already shifting lighter, like a man who had finished an obligation and was moving toward the parking lot. "Get some rest." "I'll try," I said. Vivien was already outside. I could see her through the glass door on her phone, her back to the building. I drove home alone. The house on Birchwood Lane was dark when I pulled into the driveway. Ellie's reading lamp, the one she always left on when I came home late, was off. Of course it was off. She wasn't there to turn it on. I sat in the kitchen for a long time that night. The yellow lamp above the table, the one she'd bought at the summer fair in 2003, the one she'd refused to replace because she said it gave off the right kind of light, was the only thing I turned on. My mind kept going back to the hallway, to Preston's voice, to those 8 words. "Let's just get this over with." I had raised that boy. Fed him, drove him to baseball practice, taught him to measure twice before he cut. And somewhere between the boy who used to fall asleep on my shoulder, watching football, and the man standing in that hallway tonight, something had gone missing. Something I hadn't noticed losing. I told myself it was grief, that people say things they don't mean when they're overwhelmed. I told myself a lot of things that night sitting under Ellie's lamp, but the truth is, even then, even in those first raw hours, some part of me, the part that had been working with wood long enough to recognize rot when he touched it, knew that what I had heard was not a man overwhelmed by loss. It was a man already thinking about what came next. I didn't sleep much. And when the alarm went off at 6 the following morning for the burial, I sat on the edge of the bed in the dark and realized I was dreading the day, not because I had to put Ellie in the ground, but because I had to do it standing next to a man whose voice I could still hear in that hallway. The morning of the burial was clear and cold, the kind of September sky in Lancaster County that looks almost too blue for what it's being asked to witness. I put on the dark suit I'd worn to the viewing the night before. By feel, the way Ellie had taught me back when we were young, and I still fumbled with the thing and drove to Millhaven Community Cemetery alone. I had asked Preston the evening before if he would be there in time. He said no. He had a presentation in Philadelphia that couldn't be moved. Client expectations, commitments already made, nothing he could do. His voice was even and practiced the way a man sounds when he has already decided on an answer and is simply delivering it. "I'm sorry, Dad," he said. "I'll make it up to you." I told him I understood. I drove to the cemetery by myself. When I pulled into the gravel lot, the crowd that had already gathered surprised me. Ellie had taught at Lancaster Prep for 18 years and done private tutoring out of our kitchen for 12 years before that. She knew this town the way only teachers know a town, by its children, by its kitchens, by the quiet moments when people let their guard down enough to actually learn something. I should not have been surprised that they came. But I was. Pastor Owen Tully, our minister at Millhaven Community Church, a solid man of 62 who had baptized half the congregation's grandchildren, found me in the parking lot and walked in with me. He put a hand on my shoulder the moment he saw my face. "How are you holding up, Walter?" he asked. "I'm standing," I said. "That's about all I've got right now." He nodded like that was exactly the right answer. "Then we'll make sure you keep standing. That's what today is for." He stayed beside me through the entire service, hand on my shoulder, not squeezing, not patting, just there. The way a good man stands next to another good man when the ground gets unsteady. I had written the eulogy myself. Ellie had asked me to 2 weeks before she passed, when she could still sit up and hold a real conversation. She'd taken my hand, her grip weaker than I remembered, which hit me harder than I expected, and said, "Walter, I don't want a stranger talking about my life. You were there for all of it. You tell them." I stood at the lectern and looked out at the rows of faces, people I knew. People I barely recognized. People whose children Ellie had once stayed late after school for, and I told them the truth about the woman I married. Ellie kept a notebook in her purse. I said, my voice rougher than I wanted it to be, full of questions she wanted to look up later, because she couldn't stand the feeling of not knowing something. I stopped for a second, pressed my lips together. 42 years with that woman, and I still learned something new about her every week. That's not common. That's a gift. My voice broke on the last word. I let it break and kept going. When the casket was lowered, I stood at the edge and looked down at the alderwood one last time. My chest ached with the kind of pain that has no clean edge to it, not sharp, not dull, just everywhere at once. "Goodbye, sweetheart," I said, quiet enough that only she could hear it. Afterward, I shook hands and said thank you until my arm was tired. Pastor Tully was the last to leave. He gripped my elbow before he went. "You call me," he said, "day or night. I mean that, Walter." "I know you do," I told him. "Thank you, Owen." I drove home just after noon. I sat at the kitchen table and turned on Ellie's lamp, the small yellow one she had refused to replace for over 20 years, because she said it was the only light in the house that didn't make the room feel like a waiting room. I stared at the tabletop and tried to let the morning settle into something I could carry. That's when the knock came. 3 quiet raps on the front door. I opened it and found Norma Whitfield on my porch. She was 70 years old, had lived in the blue house next door for as long as I could remember, and was one of those women whose directness you came to trust, because it never came from cruelty, only from respect. She was not carrying a casserole dish. She was not carrying flowers. She was holding her phone against her chest with both hands. "Walter," she said, and her voice had that careful, deliberate quality of someone who has rehearsed something difficult. I debated coming over here all morning, but I kept thinking if the situation were reversed, I'd want someone to tell me. My stomach tightened before she even held out the phone. I stepped back from the door. "Come inside, Norma." She sat across from me at the table. She placed the phone face down between us for just a moment, 1 breath, maybe 2, then turned it over and slid it toward me. It was a photograph. Preston and Vivien on a large boat out on the Chesapeake. Preston had a glass in his hand, amber liquid catching the sun. Vivien was laughing, head tilted back. The water behind them was bright gold. The caption read, "Much needed escape." I looked at the timestamp in the corner. I read it once. Then I read it again. Same day, same morning, I had just buried my wife. The air left my lungs in a way that had nothing to do with breathing. My hands went flat on the table, completely still, the practiced stillness of a man who has spent 40 years working with tools that punish you for shaking. "How long has this been up?" I asked. My voice came out lower than I intended. "Since this morning," Norma said. Her eyes were wet at the corners. "Some people have already seen it. I don't know what they'll do with it. But I knew I couldn't not tell you." I looked at the photo one more time. My son's easy smile, the sun on the water, the glass in his hand. I set the phone down and pushed it gently back across the table. "Thank you," I said. "For coming, Norma. I mean it." She reached over and covered my hand with hers, a brief firm grip, then stood and gathered herself to leave. At the door, she paused and looked back at me, her mouth pressed tight like she was holding back something else she had almost said. Then she was gone. I sat alone under Ellie's lamp. The clock on the wall ticked. Outside, the September light stretched long and golden through the kitchen window and laid itself across the floor like it had nowhere better to be. I did not call Preston. I did not throw anything. I just sat with what I now knew, turning it over slowly, the way you turn a piece of warped wood in your hands, feeling for the damage, figuring out whether it can still be used for something or whether it has to be set aside entirely. What I knew was the phone call I had been half expecting for 3 days was coming. I didn't know what it would be about. I didn't know what shape it would take. But I knew the way a man knows things he can't yet explain, that whatever Preston was planning had already started. And that today, with this photograph and its timestamp sitting in Norma's phone, was not the worst of it. It was just the first piece he had been careless enough to leave behind. I did not call Preston that night. I sat at the kitchen table long after Norma left Ellie's yellow lamp burning above me, and I turned the situation over in my mind, the way I used to hold a damaged beam up to the light in the shop, slowly looking at every angle, deciding whether the structure could still hold or whether it had to come down entirely. The photograph was still on Norma's phone. She had offered to send it to me, and I had told her no, not because I wanted to forget it, but because I did not need it on my own screen to remember exactly what it looked like. Preston's face, that easy smile, the amber drink catching the afternoon sun on the Chesapeake, the timestamp sitting in the corner like a date stamped on a legal document. Clean, permanent, undeniable. My wife had gone into the ground that morning, and my son had been on a boat. I poured myself 2 fingers of bourbon, something I almost never did on a weeknight, and I carried it to the back door and stood looking out at Ellie's garden in the dark. She had planted those rose bushes herself, every one of them over the course of about 6 summers. She knew every variety by name. I could not have told you the name of a single one. I had just admired them because she was proud of them, and her pride in a thing was always reason enough for me. "What do I do, Ellie?" I said out loud. Not loudly, just enough to put the words somewhere other than inside my own head. The garden did not answer. The roses were dark shapes in the September night. But the act of saying it helped the way it always helped, even now, even when she could no longer answer back. I went to bed at 11, lay on my side of the mattress, which had been my entire side of the mattress for 4 days now, and stared at the ceiling. Here is what I kept coming back to. Preston had told me he had a work trip. He had told me with a straight voice and a prepared explanation and a promise to make it up to me. And while I stood at his mother's grave that same morning, while I held myself together at that lectern and said the words she had asked me to say, he had been 50 miles away on a rented boat drink in hand, posting photographs with captions about needing an escape. An escape from what exactly? He had not been at the hospital for the last 2 weeks. He had not been at the house during the 6 weeks Ellie was sick, not once for longer than a few hours. He had not been at the viewing long enough to do more than shake hands and leave. What precisely was he escaping from? My jaw was tight. I made myself unclench it. I breathed in through my nose and out through my mouth, something Ellie used to tell me to do when I was wound up about something in the shop. You can't fix anything when your body is already fighting, she used to say. Breathe first, then think, I breathed. Then I thought. The next day I called Norma and thanked her again briefly and genuinely. She told me she had already deleted the post from her phone, and she would not be discussing it with anyone. Some things are between a father and a son, she said, her voice carrying a weight that told me she knew those words were only half true. Thank you, Norma, I said. You're a good neighbor. Ellie was my friend for 30 years, she said. And the grief in those 6 words was so clean and real it made my eyes burn. The least I could do was look out for the man she loved. I hung up and stood in the kitchen for a moment, pressing the heel of my hand against my sternum, because there was a pressure there that had not let up since the morning of the viewing. I had a feeling, not anger, not exactly something colder and more patient than anger, that I was being watched from a distance by something I had not yet identified. That Preston's absence at the burial, his voice in the hallway, the photograph on the boat, these were not separate things. They were connected. I just did not yet know how. I spent the next 2 days doing the ordinary work of grief that nobody tells you about. I called the utility companies to update the account information. I sorted through Ellie's medications and brought them to the pharmacy for disposal. I sat with her reading chair for a long time on the second day, not doing anything in particular, just being in the room where she used to sit on Sunday afternoons with a cup of tea and a book. Her reading glasses were still on the side table. I picked them up and held them in my palm for a moment. They were lightweight, thin-framed, a little scratched on the left lens from the time she dropped them in the parking lot at the grocery store in 2021. She had refused to replace them because she said she liked the scratch. It made everything on the left side look a little softer. I set them back down exactly where they had been. On the morning of the 3rd day, I was in the kitchen making coffee when my phone rang on the counter. The screen lit up with Preston's name. I looked at it for exactly 2 rings. Then I picked it up. Dad? His voice was neutral, warm in the practiced way of a man who has learned to deploy warmth the same way he deploys everything else strategically. How are you holding up? My fingers tightened around the phone. Getting through it, I said carefully. Day by day. That's all you can do, he said, with the kind of easy wisdom that costs nothing to offer. There was a brief pause, just long enough to feel intentional, and then, listen, Dad, I've been thinking. We should probably talk about the house. The coffee maker beeped behind me. I did not turn around to look at it. The house, I repeated. The market is really good right now. Preston continued, his voice picking up the smooth, confident rhythm of someone shifting into a register he was comfortable in. Interest rates are still up, but inventory is low in Lancaster County, which means sellers are getting strong offers. If you listed in the next few weeks, you could get a great price. And honestly, Dad, that house is a lot of square footage for one person. You could downsize somewhere easier to manage, pocket the difference, and not have to worry about maintenance. I sat down slowly in the kitchen chair, the one I had built myself in 1994, the year Preston started elementary school, the year I had too much energy and nowhere to put it. The wood was solid under me. It had never once wobbled in 31 years. Preston, I said, and I was surprised by how level my own voice came out. Your mother has been gone for 3 days. A beat of silence on the line. Then, I know that, Dad. I do. But these things take time to process, and it's better to think ahead than to wait until you're overwhelmed. I'm just trying to look out for you. My throat tightened. Looking out for me. Those words in that voice from the man who had been on a boat on the day of his mother's burial. I'll keep that in mind, I said. I have to go, Preston. I ended the call before he could say another word. Set the phone face down on the table. Pressed both palms flat against the oak surface, the salvaged oak I had refinished myself, the table Ellie had eaten breakfast at every morning for 22 years. My hands were shaking. Not with fear, not with sadness, with something that I had no clean word for yet. Something that lived right at the border between grief and fury, and had not yet decided which side of the line it was going to land on. I looked around that kitchen, at Ellie's lamp, at the window above the sink where she kept the small clay pot with the rosemary she grew from seed, at the doorframe leading to the hallway where she had measured Preston's height every year until he went to college and made him laugh about it even at 18. Sell the house, 3 days after I buried his mother. 3 days. I stood up from the table and walked to the back door and stood there looking at the rose garden in the pale morning light, my jaw clenched so tight it ached. Something was wrong. Not in the way that grief is wrong, disorienting, unbearable, too big for the body that has to hold it. Wrong in a different way, a structural way. The way a beam looks fine from the outside but sounds hollow when you knock on it. I did not know yet what I was looking at. But I knew with the certainty of a man who has been working with wood long enough to trust his instincts that the conversation I had just had was not about the house at all. 3 more days passed before Marcus Holt called. I did not know the name Marcus Holt. I had never heard Ellie mention it, never seen it on any document in our house, never encountered it in 31 years of owning property, filing taxes, and managing the ordinary legal paperwork of a working life in Lancaster County. So when a man introduced himself as our family's estate attorney and asked if he could arrange a time to come to the house to discuss Eleanor Grayson's last will and testament, the first thing I felt was not grief. It was suspicion. I wasn't aware Ellie had retained an attorney, I said carefully, standing at the kitchen counter with the phone pressed to my ear. She updated her estate documents approximately 8 months ago, Holt said. His voice was pleasant, professional, the kind of voice that belonged to a man who spent his days delivering unwelcome information in palatable packaging. I understand this may come as a surprise. Would Thursday work for you? Thursday works, I said. I hung up and stood there for a long moment, my hand still on the counter, my heart doing something uncomfortable behind my ribs. 8 months ago. That put the timing squarely in the period before Ellie's diagnosis, before either of us knew anything was wrong. She had updated her will without telling me. In 42 years of marriage, Ellie had never made a significant decision without telling me. Holt arrived on Thursday afternoon at 2 o'clock. He was in his late 40s, well-dressed in a navy suit with the careful grooming of a man who understood that appearance was part of his professional currency. He shook my hand firmly, set his leather briefcase on the kitchen table, and sat down across from me with the practiced ease of someone entirely comfortable in other people's homes. Preston and Vivien arrived 5 minutes later. They came together, Vivien in a charcoal blazer, Preston in the same dark jacket he had worn to the viewing. He kissed me on the cheek when he walked in, a gesture so smooth and automatic it made my stomach turn, and said, "Hey, Dad. You doing okay?" "Getting by," I said. He pulled out a chair and sat down beside Holt, as if he had done it before, as if the seating arrangement had been decided in advance. Holt opened his briefcase and removed a document, thick, clipped, official. He cleared his throat and began. The will was long. Holt walked through it methodically, clause by clause, in the measured cadence of a man reading aloud from something he had already memorized. I sat with my hands folded on the table and listened. And as I listened, the uncomfortable thing behind my ribs got heavier and heavier, until by the time Holt reached the asset distribution section, I felt like I was breathing around something solid lodged in my chest. Nearly everything went to Preston. The joint savings account, 43 years of careful accumulation, transferred to him outright. The investment portfolio Ellie had managed quietly for years, listed under her name alone, directed to him in full. The proceeds from any future sale of Grayson Woodworks equipment, should I choose to liquidate, directed to him. My provision was simple: the right to remain in the family home at 14 Birchwood Lane for the duration of my natural life. And one sealed envelope placed on the table in front of me by Marcus Holt, with the careful neutrality of a man delivering a verdict he had not written. The envelope had my name on it, in Ellie's handwriting. The E slightly tilted to the right, the way it always was. I stared at it. "That's everything," Holt said, closing the document. He looked at me with something that might have been sympathy or might have been the professional approximation of it. "Do you have any questions, Mr. Grayson?" My mouth was dry. I opened it and closed it once before I found the words. "Did my wife come to you alone when she made these changes?" "She did," Holt said. "The updates were made in a single appointment in January of this year. Everything was signed and witnessed at my office." I nodded slowly. My eyes moved to Preston. He was looking at the table, not at me, one hand resting on his knee, with a stillness that struck me as deliberate. Vivien had no such restraint. She looked directly at me, and the expression on her face was one I will not forget, a small, tight smile, the smile of a woman who had been waiting for this moment and had decided she had earned the right to enjoy it. "Eleanor always knew who worked hardest for this family," she said. The words hit me like a fist to the sternum. My jaw tightened. I felt heat rush up through my chest and into my face, and I held it there, clamped down on it with everything I had, because I was not going to give her the satisfaction of watching me react. "Thank you for coming, Mr. Holt," I said. My voice was steady, barely but steady. Holt shook my hand and left. Preston murmured something about checking in later and guided Vivien toward the door. She walked out without looking back at me, and then they were gone. I sat alone at the kitchen table. In front of me was the sealed envelope with my name on it in Ellie's handwriting. To my left, the empty chairs where Preston and Vivien had sat. Above me, Ellie's yellow lamp casting its warm, indifferent light over all of it. My hands were trembling on the tabletop. Not with anger, or not only with anger, with something more fractured than that. Because the woman I had shared a bed with for 42 years, the woman who had held my hand in the hospital and asked me to write her eulogy, had apparently left almost everything we built together to a son who had spent the past several years becoming a stranger to us both. I did not understand it, but the envelope was right there, her handwriting on the front. And some part of me, the part that had trusted this woman completely for 4 decades, was not ready to believe that she had meant for things to be the way Holt had just described them. Not yet. I picked up the envelope, turned it over in my hands, ran my thumb across her name for me, Walter. The letters slightly uneven, like she had written it quickly or under pressure, or with something weighing on her that I could not yet see. I wanted to open it right then. Every instinct I had was pulling toward it, but something stopped me. A feeling I could not name precisely, a combination of caution and grief, and the vague but insistent sense that whatever was in this envelope needed to be read at the right moment, not just the nearest one. I put it in the kitchen drawer, the one Ellie always kept her spare keys in, along with the small paper notes she never threw away. I closed the drawer, pressed my palm flat against it for a second. "Not yet," I told her quietly. "I'm not ready yet." I straightened up, poured the coffee I hadn't touched all afternoon down the sink, and stood at the window looking out at the garden. The roses were still blooming, barely at the edge of the season, but hanging on. The way things do when they were planted by someone who knew what she was doing and trusted the soil to remember. I did not know what Ellie had left in that envelope. I did not know why she had changed her will without telling me, or what she had been afraid of in January of this year, or what she had seen in our son that she had not yet found a way to say out loud. What I knew was this: somewhere in that drawer was a piece of paper with her handwriting on it. And whatever it said, she had meant for me to have it. That had to mean something. That had to be enough, at least until I understood what I was truly looking at. 3 days after Marcus Holt read that will aloud in my living room, I still hadn't touched Ellie's side of the closet. But the garage, that was a different story. I went in to find my old level, the one I used when I built the back porch in 1994. Ellie used to stand behind me and say, "Walter, you've been staring at that bubble for 10 minutes. Just nail the board." I smiled every time she said it. I didn't smile that afternoon. I pulled open the bottom drawer of the metal cabinet, the one with the bent handle I kept meaning to fix. And there it was. A narrow blue notebook wedged beneath 2 coils of extension cord and a rusted can of wood stain. I almost passed it by. But something made me stop. Ellie's handwriting was on the cover. Just one line pressed into the paper like she'd meant it to stay there forever. For Walter, only Walter. My hands were already shaking before I even opened it. I sat down on the old wooden stool and flipped to the first page. The date at the top read January 4th, 2025. That was 9 months before she passed. If you're reading this, then I wasn't brave enough to tell you face to face. I'm sorry, sweetheart. I tried. Every morning I told myself today was the day. And every morning I lost my nerve. My throat tightened so fast I had to put the notebook down and press my hand against my chest. I picked it back up. Preston came to the house on December 19th while you were at Frank Odell's place. He brought documents. He told me they were routine refinancing papers, he said. He was very calm about it. He said, "Mom, just sign these so we can protect the house." I read that sentence 4 times. My jaw was clenched so tight my back teeth ached. I signed 2 of them. I don't know why. He was my son. And I was tired that day. The medication makes me so tired. But afterwards, something felt wrong. I looked at the top of one page before he took it back. The number I saw didn't match anything we'd discussed with the bank. I stood up off the stool. I couldn't sit still. "Ellie," I said out loud right there in the garage to no one but the air between us. "Ellie, what did he make you sign?" I turned to the next page. Her handwriting got smaller, like she was trying to fit everything in before her strength ran out. I called Theo Drummond the next day. You remember Theo? We met him at the Millhaven Harvest Fair in 2003. He was a CPA for 30 years. I told him the number I remembered from the document. He went quiet. Then he said, "Ellie, that's not a refinancing figure. That's a mortgage draw." My knees nearly buckled. I grabbed the edge of the cabinet to steady myself. A mortgage draw. On our house. The house I built with my own hands in 1987. The house Ellie brought Preston home to as a newborn. The house where she planted the hydrangeas along the front walk that still bloom every June. I kept reading. Theo said he would look into it quietly. He said not to confront Preston alone. He said, "Ellie, men like this don't stop when you ask them to. They only stop when they're forced to." I didn't want to believe my own son was a man like that. But I think I've known it for a long time. I just loved him too much to say it. I had to stop. My eyes were burning, that deep, painful sting behind both lids that you get when you're holding something in that's too big to hold. I pressed the back of my hand against my mouth and breathed through my nose until the feeling passed enough for me to keep going. The last entry in the notebook was dated August 12th, 3 weeks before she died. I don't know how much time I have left. But Theo has everything. He knows what to do. Don't trust any document Preston asks you to sign after I'm gone, Walter. Not one page, not one line. He will come. And he will sound very reasonable. That's what frightens me most, how reasonable he sounds. I closed the notebook. I stood in my garage holding 42 years of marriage in the form of a blue spiral notebook, and I let myself feel every bit of what that meant. My shoulders shook. My breath came out ragged and uneven. I didn't try to stop it. I just pressed the notebook against my chest and held it there like I was holding her. "I hear you, Ellie." I managed my voice cracking down the middle. "I hear you." When I finally walked back into the house, I put the notebook on the kitchen table. and sat in front of it for a long time. Theo Drummond. She'd said Theo had everything. I hadn't spoken to Theo in 2 years, maybe 3, but I was going to call him tonight. And somewhere in the back of my mind, something colder settled in, beneath the grief, the quiet, steady weight of a man who has just realized the fight he's walking into is far bigger than he thought. I called Theo that same night, but he didn't pick up. I left a message and spent the rest of the evening at the kitchen table, the blue notebook open in front of me. The call I didn't expect came the following morning, not from Theo, but from Norma Whitfield. Norma is 70 years old and has lived next door to us since 1991. She brought us a casserole the night Ellie got her diagnosis. She showed up at the cemetery in a black coat, buttoned all the way to her chin, and she held my elbow while we walked back to the cars. She is the kind of neighbor that people write about in obituaries and mean every word. When her number lit up my phone at 8:15 that morning, I answered immediately. "Walter," she said, and her voice was tight like she'd been rehearsing this. "I need to come over. There's something I should have told you weeks ago, and I'm sorry I waited this long." "Come now," I said. "Door's open." She was on my porch in under 4 minutes. I poured 2 cups of coffee and set them on the kitchen table. Norma sat down across from me, wrapped both hands around her mug, and took a breath that seemed to come from somewhere very deep. "December," she said. "The 19th. Preston came to the house." My grip on my mug tightened. "I know," I said carefully. "Ellie wrote about it." Norma's eyes widened slightly. "She wrote it down. She kept a notebook." Norma closed her eyes for a brief moment, and when she opened them, something in her face shifted like a woman who had carried a stone for a very long time and had just been given permission to set it down. "I was in my yard," she said, leaning forward, "pulling dead stems out of the garden bed along the fence. You know how close our properties run. I can hear a conversation on your back porch clear as a radio. And I heard Preston's voice. He was in the kitchen with Ellie." "What did he say?" "He said, 'Mom, this is a formality. It's just paperwork. Sign it and I'll handle everything.'" Norma's jaw tightened. "And Ellie said, 'Preston, I haven't read it.' And he said, and I remember this exactly, 'Walter, because I stopped what I was doing, and I just stood there,' he said, 'you don't need to read it. That's what you have me for.'" My chest felt like it had a fist pressed against it from the inside. "She signed them?" I asked, even though I already knew. "She did," Norma said, and her voice cracked on the last word. "I heard the pen on the table, and then I heard Ellie say very quietly, 'I hope you're right, Preston.' And he said, 'I always am, Mom.'" Norma shook her head, her eyes going glassy. "I went back inside. I told myself it was family business. I told myself I'd misunderstood something. And I've been telling myself that ever since." "Norma." I reached across the table and put my hand over hers. My own hand was trembling. "You didn't misunderstand anything." "No," she said, and one tear tracked down the left side of her face. She didn't wipe it away. "I didn't." We drank our coffee without rushing. Outside, the October wind pushed the last of the maple leaves off the big tree in the front yard, the one Ellie had named Margaret, because she said all trees should have names. "There's more," Norma said after a moment. I set down my mug. "About 2 weeks later," she continued, sitting up straighter, like the telling of it required her full posture, "I saw a car I didn't recognize parked in front of your house. A dark blue sedan. A man in a gray suit went to the door. Preston answered, not Ellie. And they carried a folder between them, went inside, and were there for about 45 minutes. Did you see the man again?" "No. But I wrote down the license plate." She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper, sliding it across the table toward me. "I don't know why I did it. Habit, maybe. Or something in my gut." I unfolded the paper. A Pennsylvania plate. 7 characters in Norma's careful, small handwriting. "Norma," I said slowly, "I need you to be willing to say all of this again. To a lawyer. Maybe to a judge." She didn't hesitate. not even for a breath. Walter, I've been ready to say it since the day of the funeral. Her voice went firm, almost fierce. I should have said it then. I should have grabbed your arm at the cemetery and told you everything right there. I didn't, and I will carry that. But I'm saying it now, and I'll say it as many times as they need me to. My eyes burned. That deep, painful sting again. I pressed my lips together hard and nodded. Thank you, I managed. 2 words barely above a whisper. But I meant them with everything I had left. After Norma went home, I sat on the porch for a few minutes. The cold had settled in across Birchwood Lane, the kind of October cold that gets into your coat collar no matter how high you pull it up. But I didn't go inside. I needed the air. I thought about Ellie signing those papers at her own kitchen table. I thought about her saying, I hope you're right, Preston. I thought about how much she must have loved him to still be hoping even then. And I thought about Theo's number in my phone still waiting to be answered. I went back inside, picked up my phone, and called Carol Beckett. I'd met Carol once. She'd handled a small contract dispute for the woodshop 3 years back. She was sharp, plain-spoken, and she had a way of listening like she was storing every word in a place she could find it again later. She answered on the 3rd ring. Carol, I said, it's Walter Grayson. I need to talk to you about something serious. And I need to know right now, can you take a case against a man's own son? A pause. Then her voice careful and steady. Tell me everything, Walter. Start from the beginning. I pulled out a kitchen chair, sat down, and pressed the phone tight against my ear. I started from the beginning. Carol Beckett's office in Harrisburg smelled like strong coffee and printer paper. Functional, no-nonsense, exactly the kind of place a woman like her would work. She was 55, broad-shouldered, with reading glasses pushed up on her forehead, and eyes that moved fast and missed nothing. When I walked in that first Monday of October, she stood up and shook my hand with both of hers. Mr. Grayson, she said, sit down. We have a lot to cover. Call me Walter. I set Ellie's notebook on her desk. She told me to find you. Carol looked at the notebook, and her expression shifted. Something softened for just a moment before the professional composure returned. She was a careful woman, she said. One of the most prepared clients I've ever had, and I've been doing this for 27 years. She came to you in January, I said, 8 months before she died. She did. Carol opened a thick folder on her desk. She was already concerned about Preston's intentions toward the property. She had reason to be. She slid a document across the desk. Walter, when did you last review the mortgage on your home? My chest tightened. Ellie handled the financial paperwork. Always did. I built the house, she managed the numbers. That was our arrangement for 40 years. And you trusted her completely. Completely. Carol's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Then I need you to look at this very carefully. It was a mortgage refinancing document. The property address was mine, 412 Dunmore Road, Millhaven. The date on the document was 14 months ago, August 2024. Both signatures were on the signature line. Mine and Ellie's. I leaned forward and stared at my own name. Something about the angle of the capital W was wrong, too sharp at the base, no trailing curve. I had been signing my name for 68 years. I knew exactly how it looked. That's not my signature, I said. My voice came out flat and certain. That is not my handwriting. No, Carol said. It isn't. She folded her hands on the desk and looked at me directly. The refinancing pulled $180,000 in equity against your home, Walter. The funds were dispersed to an LLC registered in Delaware, Grayson Capital Partners. That LLC has one registered member. My back teeth ground together. Preston. Yes. I stood up from the chair. My legs felt wrong, like the floor had shifted 2 inches lower than expected. I gripped the edge of her desk with both hands and stared at the document, at my forged name, at Ellie's signature, that I now had no way of knowing was truly hers, at the $180,000 that had walked out of the house I built board by board over 3 summers in the 1980s. He mortgaged my house, I said, while Ellie was alive, while she was sick. The refinancing was filed in August 2024, Carol said. Ellie was already in treatment. The hospice assessment came in November. She paused. In my professional opinion, it is possible, even probable, that Ellie didn't fully understand what she was signing, if she signed at all. Or she may have signed under the same false pretense as the will being told you had already agreed. My hands were shaking so hard the edge of the desk vibrated under my grip. 40 years. 40 years of sawdust and mortgage payments and grocery lists on green notebooks. And my son had walked in while his mother was losing her fight and drained $180,000 out of the walls around her. What do I do? I asked. My voice didn't shake. I wouldn't let it. First, Carol said, we retain a forensic document examiner. I have one on retainer named Dr. Raymond Ford. He'll analyze both signatures and produce a certified report. Second, I file an emergency motion to freeze any further transfers against the property until the court reviews the chain of title. She pulled out a legal pad. Third, and this is important, you don't call Preston. You don't mention the mortgage. You let him believe he still has the advantage. I looked at her. You think he's planning another move? I think, Carol said carefully, that a man who forges a mortgage while his mother is in hospice care is not finished. She leaned forward. Walter, I need to ask you something. Before Ellie passed in those final weeks, did Preston ever ask you to sign anything? Any document he presented casually, maybe at the house? My mind went back. October. Preston had come for dinner, brought takeout from that Italian place Ellie liked. After dinner, he'd pulled out a folder, said something about updating the emergency contact forms for Ellie's hospital account, asked me to initial 2 pages. I initialed them without reading closely, because Ellie was in the next room and tired, and I wanted to get back to her. The air went out of my lungs. October, I said. He brought dinner. Carol's pen stopped moving. She looked up slowly. What did you sign? He said it was emergency contact forms. My voice came out hollow. 2 pages. I initialed them. I didn't read carefully. I pressed both hands against my face. God help me, I didn't read them. That may be the mortgage, Carol said quietly. Or it may be something else entirely. She set down her pen. Walter, look at me. I dropped my hands. My eyes were burning hot and dry. This is not your fault, she said. He planned this, methodically, against both of you. She held my gaze steady and firm. But he made one mistake. What? He didn't know about me. Carol Beckett picked up her pen. Let's get to work. 3 days after my meeting with Carol, her assistant called and asked me back to the Harrisburg office by Thursday afternoon. No explanation. Just he drove 4 hours to be here. Please come. I made the 40-minute drive with both hands tight on the wheel and Ellie's notebook on the passenger seat where I could see it. Old habit keeping something solid nearby when everything else felt like it was dissolving. When I walked into Carol's conference room, a man was already seated 60-something, thick through the shoulders, with the careful stillness of someone who had spent years learning exactly when to speak. He stood and offered his hand. Walter Grayson. I'm Gerald Foss, Regional Compliance Director at Meridian Capital Group in Philadelphia until 2017. His grip was firm and unhurried. I've been waiting a long time to sit in this room. What does Meridian Capital Group have to do with my son? I asked. Gerald opened a worn leather briefcase and pulled out a manila folder, thick, dog-eared, the kind that had been opened and closed 100 times. Everything, he said. Sit down. Carol poured coffee. Gerald began. Preston worked at Meridian as a junior fund manager from 2008 to 2013. In spring 2012, our internal audit team flagged irregularities, approximately $340,000, moved across 3 sub-accounts, structured carefully to stay just under the automatic reporting threshold. My coffee cup stopped halfway to my mouth. $340,000. Traced to Preston's personal LLC, a shell company he'd set up 6 months earlier. Gerald's voice was measured clinical. When confronted, he denied everything. He claimed subordinate had acted independently. That subordinate was a 24-year-old analyst named Devon Marsh, 11 months at the firm, no access to those sub-accounts whatsoever. What happened to Devon? I asked. Gerald's jaw tightened. Terminated. Securities license suspended. The firm settled, quietly paid Devon a confidential amount. Preston was allowed to resign without formal charges. He slid the folder across the table. He walked away. Not clean, but away. I kept the file. Audit trail, internal emails, transfer records, settlement agreement, and Devon's written account of everything Preston told him to do. He met my eyes. Preston showed Devon a memo authorizing the transfers signed by a senior partner. That signature was later confirmed to be forged. The word hit the room like something dropped from a height. I pressed both palms flat on the table. He's been doing this for 12 years. I said, my voice low and tightly controlled. He practiced on a 24-year-old kid in Philadelphia and then came home and did it to his own mother. Gerald looked at me with an expression seasoned by years of carrying something nobody wanted to touch. I tried bringing this to the DA in 2014. Insufficient evidence without Devon's cooperation, and Devon had signed an NDAA. He paused. Last month, Devon reached out. He's 40 now, 2 daughters. He read about Ellie's passing in the Mill Haven Courier and recognized the name. My throat tightened so sharply I had to breathe through it. He wants to talk. He already talked. Gerald produced a notarized sworn statement, 4 pages signed and witnessed 2 weeks ago. His NDA expired in 2021. He's been waiting for the right moment. I picked it up with hands that wouldn't stop shaking and stopped trying to make them. I read every word Devon had written, the memos, the assurances, Preston looking him dead in the eye when audit arrived and saying, "You handle this, I'll take care of you," and then walking away clean. He was 24, I said. My voice broke and I didn't apologize for it. Preston destroyed that young man's career. He rebuilt it, Carol said quietly. Devon is a compliance officer in Columbus now, everything from scratch. She held my gaze, but he never forgot. I set the statement on top of the mortgage documents on top of Ellie's notebook, the stack growing thick with everything Preston believed he'd buried. "Gerald," I said, "why carry this 12 years?" Something loosened in Gerald's expression, a knot finally releasing. "Because Devon was 24 and did nothing wrong. And because men like Preston don't stop. They find the next target, whoever trusts them most, and take everything they can carry." His voice hardened. "I kept the file because I knew another target was coming. I just didn't know it would be his own father." Carol leaned forward. Walter Gerald's file. Devon's statement. The forensic mortgage analysis. Ellie's notebook. Norma's photographs. Together, they don't show an isolated incident. They show a methodology, a pattern of conduct. She set her pen down. That changes everything. I looked at the stack in front of me, the accumulated weight of everything Preston thought was gone forever. "When do we move?" I asked. "I call Judge Norwood's clerk tomorrow morning." Carol looked at me steadily. "It will be hard. Preston will fight with everything Holt can manufacture. I built a house with my own hands when I was 30, I said. I buried my wife 6 weeks ago. I have Gerald's file, Ellie's notebook, and Norma's photographs. I picked up my coffee cold by now and drank it anyway. Let him fight." Carol Beckett smiled, small, precise, completely genuine. "Then we're ready," she said. Carol called me on a Thursday evening at the end of October. The maples along Dunmore Road had gone full red by then, the kind of burning, saturated color Ellie used to stop the car to look at. I was sitting on the porch steps with a cup of coffee I'd forgotten to drink when my phone rang. "Walter?" Carol said, "I need you in the office tomorrow morning, not afternoon. Morning, 8 o'clock. Something in her voice made me sit straighter. What happened? Dr. Ford finished his analysis of the mortgage signatures. A brief pause. "And I received a courier package this afternoon. It was addressed to me in Ellie's handwriting, postmarked January 14th, 2025. She included a note with it. She asked me not to open it until you came to me yourself. She wanted to make sure you had found the notebook first, that you understood what you were walking into before you saw this." My chest tightened hard and fast. "She mailed you something in January." "She mailed me something in January," Carol confirmed. "She was very thorough, your wife." Another pause, softer this time. "Walter, get some sleep tonight. Tomorrow is going to be a long day." I didn't sleep. I sat at the kitchen table until 2 in the morning, with a glass of water I didn't touch, and the yellow birdhouse from the garage shelf in front of me, because it was the last thing her hands had built, and I needed something real to look at. By 7:15 the next morning, I was already on the highway. Carol's office was fully lit when I arrived, her assistant already at her desk, with 2 coffees waiting. Carol herself stood at the head of the conference table, and beside her sat a thin man in his late 50s, with wire-rimmed glasses and the precise, unhurried movements of someone accustomed to testifying in court. She introduced him as Dr. Raymond Ford, forensic document examiner. "Sit down, Walter," Carol said. "Raymond, go ahead." Dr. Ford opened a bound report and slid a copy across to me. "Mr. Grayson, I examined 4 documents: the August 2024 mortgage refinancing, the updated will filed by Marcus Holt, a reference set of your authenticated signatures from your 2019 home equity application, and a reference set of Mrs. Grayson's authenticated signatures from the same source." He tapped the first page. "My conclusions are as follows. The signature attributed to you on the mortgage refinancing document is not consistent with your authentic signature. The pressure pattern, letter spacing, and baseline trajectory indicate a simulation, someone copying your signature from a reference, not writing naturally." He looked at me over his glasses. "In my professional opinion, to a reasonable degree of scientific certainty, that signature is a forgery." My jaw was so tight I felt it in my temples. "And Ellie's signature?" Dr. Ford's expression shifted, careful, measured. "Mrs. Grayson's signature on the mortgage document is consistent with her authentic signature under duress. The tremor pattern suggests significant physical stress at the time of signing, consistent with advanced illness. However, the signature itself appears to be genuinely hers." He paused. "Which suggests she did sign. Under what circumstances and with what understanding, that is a matter for the court." "He told her I had agreed," I said. My voice came out barely above a growl. "Same as the will. He told her I agreed, she believed him, and she signed." That is consistent with the evidence," Dr. Ford said quietly. "I'm sorry, Mr. Grayson." I pressed both fists flat against the table and breathed. Carol let me have that moment without interruption, and I was grateful for it. "All right," I said. "What else?" Carol reached for the courier package, a padded envelope already opened, Ellie's handwriting on the front, in her careful loops. She pulled out a folded letter and a sealed legal document marked with a notary stamp. "Ellie mailed this to me in January," Carol said. "She included a cover letter explaining that she did not want you to receive this until you had already found the notebook and contacted me. She wanted you to understand the full picture before seeing this." She slid the letter across to me. "This is hers. Read it." I picked up the letter. Ellie's handwriting. "January 9th, 2025. 8 months before she died, 7 months before I found the green notebook in the garage. Gray, if Carol is showing you this, you already know most of what Preston did. I'm sorry I didn't tell you face to face. I was afraid of what you would do, not because I don't trust your judgment, but because I know how much you love that boy even now, and I was afraid that love would make you hesitate. Don't hesitate. In 2019, my uncle Raymond Ellsworth Dunmore passed away. He left me a trust, the Clearwater Ridge Family Protective Trust, valued at the time at approximately $14 million in managed assets. I did not tell Preston. I did not tell you either, and I'm sorry for that. I was advised by my attorney to keep the trust private until the estate was fully settled, and then Raymond's health declined, and it slipped, and then the years passed. The trust is structured so that if any unauthorized transfer of assets bearing my name is attempted, the trust automatically freezes all affiliated accounts and reverts full control to the named beneficiary. The named beneficiary, Gray, is you. The Clearwater Ridge Trust is currently valued at approximately $17 million. I have enclosed the trust documentation. Carol knows what to do with it. I love you, Gray. I should have told you about the money. I should have told you a lot of things sooner. But I was always better at building things quietly than explaining them out loud, and you married me anyway. Yours always, Ellie. I read it twice. By the second time, my eyes were burning so badly I could barely see the last line. I set the letter down on the table very carefully, like it was something that could break. $17 million, I said. My voice didn't sound like mine. Yes. Carol's voice was gentle but steady. And because Preston's unauthorized mortgage transfer triggered the trust's protection clause, the freeze on the Clearwater Ridge accounts activated automatically in August 2024, the moment Holt filed the paperwork. She leaned forward. He tried to access the equity in your home, Walter. What he didn't know was that the moment he did, he locked himself out of $17 million he didn't even know existed. A sound came out of me, raw and shaking and completely beyond my control. It wasn't grief exactly, and it wasn't relief. It was something that had been wound so tight for 2 months that it simply gave way all at once. I pressed both hands over my face and shook. Dr. Ford quietly excused himself from the room. Carol did not reach over and pat my shoulder. She did not say, "Everything will be okay." She simply sat across from me and waited steady as a post while I pulled myself back together. After a long moment, I lowered my hands. My eyes were wet, and I didn't wipe them. "She was always 3 steps ahead," I said. "She was." Carol picked up her pen. "And now we use every step she laid down." She opened her legal pad. "Walter, I'm filing for a full hearing before Judge Patricia Norwood. I'm presenting the forged mortgage, Dr. Ford's report, Ellie's letter, the trust documentation, and Norma's photographs as a unified evidentiary package." She looked up. "And I'm calling Theo Drummond as our first witness." I straightened in my chair. "Theo's testifying." "Theo has been holding something for us," Carol said. "Something that will make Marcus Holt very uncomfortable." She allowed herself a small, precise smile. "Let's let Preston think he's still winning for a little while longer." I picked up Ellie's letter and folded it back along its original creases, exactly the way she had folded it in January when she was still alive and still fighting and still thinking 3 moves ahead of everyone in the room. "Then let's go to court," I said. The first hearing before Judge Patricia Norwood was scheduled for the second Thursday of November, a gray morning in Harrisburg that smelled like coming rain and cold concrete. I put on the charcoal suit I had worn to Ellie's burial because it was the most serious thing I owned, and I drove the 40 minutes from Millhaven with Theo Drummond in the passenger seat. Theo was 72 years old, built like a man who had once been very large and had simply compacted with age wide across the chest, slow-moving with hands that had spent 40 years in construction management and showed every year of it. He had been my friend since 1987. He had been the best man at my wedding. He had stood at Ellie's graveside and cried openly without embarrassment, the way old men do when they have stopped caring what crying looks like. He held a manila envelope on his lap the entire drive and didn't put it down once. "You okay?" I asked him somewhere past the county line. "I've been carrying this for 9 months," he said. "I'll be a lot better once I put it on that judge's table." I kept my eyes on the road. "Ellie asked you to hold it." "February," he said. "She called me from the hospital, not from her room, from the nurse's station down the hall, because she said she didn't want Preston walking in and seeing the call. She told me what he'd done with the will. She said, 'Theo, I need you to hold something for me and bring it to Carol Beckett when the time comes.' I drove to the hospital the next day. She handed me that envelope through the door like she was passing contraband." His voice roughened at the edges. "She was in her hospital gown, Walter, hooked up to the IV, and she was completely calm. Calm and angry at the same time. You know that face she had." "I know that face," I said. My throat tightened. She said, "Don't open it. Don't show it to Walter yet. He needs to find the notebook first, or he won't have the full picture." Theo turned the envelope over in his hands. "I almost broke that rule 4 times. "I'm glad you didn't," I said. She knew what she was doing. The Dauphin County Courthouse was a solid stone building that had been making people feel small since 1941. The courtroom assigned to Judge Norwood was on the 3rd floor, high ceilings, wood paneling, the kind of room that expected seriousness and got it. Carol was already there when Theo and I walked in, her briefcase open on the plaintiff's table, papers arranged with the precision of a woman who had done this hundreds of times and never once gone in underprepared. Preston arrived 4 minutes later with Marcus Holt at his side. Preston wore a dark blue suit and an expression of careful, practiced concern. The face he had been showing the world since Ellie's funeral. The grieving son performance he had rehearsed without ever quite getting the grief right. He glanced at me, and then at Theo, and then at the envelope in Theo's hands, and something behind his eyes flickered and went carefully flat. He had seen that envelope before. I was certain of it. Marcus Holt, for his part, settled into his chair with the ease of a man who believed the outcome was already written. He was polished and precise, expensive suit, expensive watch, the quiet confidence of someone accustomed to winning on paperwork alone. He set his own folder on the table without looking in our direction once. Judge Patricia Norwood entered at 9 o'clock exactly. She was 58 trim, with reading glasses on a chain around her neck, and the unhurried authority of someone who had long since stopped needing to prove she was in charge. She sat. We sat. "We are here today," she said, "on a petition for emergency review of estate documents and a motion to void the mortgage refinancing filed August 14th, 2024, against the property at 412 Dunmore Road, Millhaven." She looked over her glasses at both tables. "Ms. Beckett, you may call your first witness." "Thank you, Your Honor." Carol stood. "The petitioner calls Theodore Drummond." Theo walked to the stand with the measured pace of a man carrying something heavy and precious. He settled into the chair, set the envelope on his knee, and looked out at the courtroom with the steady eyes of a man who was done waiting. Carol led him through the foundation, his name, his relationship to our family, the length of our friendship. Then she walked directly to the center of the room. "Mr. Drummond," she said, "did Eleanor Grayson contact you in February of this year?" "She did," Theo said. "February 11th. She called me from the nurse's station at St. Catherine's Medical Center. She asked me to come to the hospital the following morning." "And did she give you something at that meeting?" "She did." Theo held up the envelope. "She gave me this. She asked me to hold it for safekeeping and deliver it to Carol Beckett when the legal proceedings began." "Your Honor," Carol said, turning to the bench, "I would like to enter Petitioner's Exhibit 7, the contents of this envelope, into evidence." Marcus Holt was on his feet before she finished the sentence. "Objection, Your Honor." The chain of custody for this document is unverified. We have only this witness's account of how it was obtained. Judge Norwood looked at him calmly. I'll hear the foundation first, Mr. Holt. Sit down. Holt sat. A muscle in Preston's jaw jumped once hard. Carol opened the envelope carefully and removed its contents. 3 documents, which she laid on the exhibit table one by one. She described each for the record first, a copy of the original will. Eleanor Grayson had filed in 2018, witnessed by 2 signatories, and notarized, leaving the estate equally to Walter Grayson. Second, a letter in Ellie's handwriting, dated February 10th, the day before she called Theo, describing in precise detail the circumstances under which Preston had pressured her to sign the updated will, including the forged authorization document he had shown her. Third, and this was the one that changed the temperature of the room, a photocopy of the document Preston had presented in the hospital. The one bearing my forged signature. Ellie had kept a copy. Somehow in the middle of everything, she had kept a copy. Preston's face went to the color of old ash. His hand moved toward Holt's arm and stopped itself. Mr. Drummond, Carol said, turning back to the stand. Did Mrs. Grayson say anything to you when she handed you this envelope? Oh. Theo's jaw worked for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was rough and completely certain. She said, Theo Gray is going to need proof he can hold in his hands. Make sure he gets it. The courtroom was very still. Judge Norwood looked at the documents on the exhibit table. Then she looked at Marcus Holt. Mr. Holt, she said, does your client wish to request a recess? Holt leaned to Preston and spoke in a rapid undertone. Preston's eyes were fixed straight ahead, and for the first time since Ellie's funeral, his expression was not performing anything at all. Yes, Your Honor, Holt said. We request a 30-minute recess. Judge Norwood nodded, once removed her glasses and set them on the bench. 30 minutes, counsel. She looked at the room with the level gaze of a woman who had seen every kind of unraveling a courtroom could produce. We'll resume at 10:15. I looked at Theo as he stepped down from the stand. His eyes were bright and wet at the corners. He walked back to where I sat and dropped heavily into the chair beside me. She made me promise not to open it, he said, his voice barely above a murmur. 9 months, Walter. I kept that promise. I put my hand on his arm and gripped it hard. My own eyes were burning, and I didn't try to stop it. You did good, Theo, I said. You did exactly right. Across the room, Preston Grayson stared at the exhibit table where his mother's handwriting lay in plain sight under the courtroom lights. And for the first time in this entire long, grinding ordeal, I watched him run out of performance. The 30-minute recess Preston's lawyer had requested stretched into 45. I sat in the courtroom hallway on a wooden bench with Theo on one side and Carol on the other, and I watched the second hand on the wall clock like it owed me something. He's rattled, Theo said, keeping his voice low. Did you see his face when the judge put those documents on the table? I saw it, I said. Good. Theo exhaled through his nose. Because I've been waiting 9 months to see that face. Carol had her legal pad open on her knee and was writing in fast, clean strokes. She didn't look up when she spoke. When we go back in, Walter, I need you to stay composed no matter what Holt presents. He is going to attempt to reframe Ellie's letter as the product of a confused, medicated mind. He'll use her illness against her. My jaw tightened hard enough to ache. He'll try. He will try, Carol confirmed, looking up now, and we will let him finish, and then I will introduce Exhibit 9. She held my gaze. That is the piece Preston does not know about. That is the piece that ends this. What is Exhibit 9? I asked. Carol allowed herself the smallest, most controlled smile I had ever seen on a human face. The Grayson Family Protective Trust, she said. Ellie didn't just leave you a letter and a notebook, Walter. She left you a structure, a legal architecture she built over 6 years with Raymond Dunmore's estate attorney, specifically designed to protect the family's assets in the event of exactly this kind of interference. She set her pen down. The trust has a self-executing protection clause. The moment any unauthorized financial transfer bearing either your name or Ellie's name is filed without dual authenticated consent, the trust locks all affiliated assets and flags the transfer to the trustee of record. I stared at her. When did it lock? August 14th, 2024, she said. The moment Marcus Holt filed the mortgage refinancing. I pressed both hands against my knees and leaned forward. My head was ringing. So the moment he filed that mortgage, every asset held under the Grayson Family Protective Trust, including the Clearwater Ridge Fund, froze. Carol's voice was precise and unhurried. And a notification was sent automatically to the trustee of record, who is Raymond Dunmore's former estate attorney, a man named Lawrence Beaumont in Pittsburgh. Lawrence called my office in September. He had been tracking the flag since August and was waiting for a legal proceeding to bring it forward. She tapped her legal pad. Exhibit 9 is Lawrence Beaumont's certified trustee, report the automated flag notification with timestamp, and the full trust instrument, all notarized, all authenticated. The clock on the wall read 10:12, 3 minutes until we went back in. Preston filed that mortgage thinking he was pulling equity out of my house, I said slowly. And what he actually did was lock himself out of $17 million and generate a documented paper trail that led straight to him. That is precisely correct, Carol said. A sound came out of me low and disbelieving, halfway between a laugh and something that ached right down to the center of my chest. I thought about Ellie in January, sick and clear-eyed and furious, mailing packages from hospital waiting rooms, calling Theo from the nurse's station, arranging pieces on a board that Preston didn't even know was in play. She beat him, I said. My voice cracked on the last word and I let it. She beat him before she ever left. Theo put his hand on my shoulder and gripped it hard. His eyes were red at the rims. He didn't say anything because there wasn't anything to say. The bailiff opened the courtroom door. Judge Norwood is returning to the bench. We went back in. Marcus Holt had clearly used the recess to reorganize. He stood at his table with the posture of a man who had decided to attack rather than retreat. His folder open, his expression rebuilt into something smooth and combative. Preston sat beside him with his hands folded on the table, too still, too controlled, the look of a man gripping himself from the inside. Holt went first, as Carol expected. He presented a motion challenging the authenticity of Ellie's February letter, arguing that her documented medical condition, advanced pancreatic cancer, significant pain medication, rendered any written statement from that period unreliable as legal evidence. His voice was measured and authoritative. He cited 2 case precedents. He used the phrase diminished capacity 4 times. I kept my hands flat on the table and my face composed the way I used to hold myself on a construction site when something went wrong and everyone was watching to see if I'd panic. When Holt sat down, Carol stood up. Your Honor, she said. The respondent's motion raises the question of Mrs. Grayson's mental capacity in February. I would like to address that question directly. She walked to the exhibit table and placed a new document before the judge. Petitioner's Exhibit 9, the Grayson Family Protective Trust Instrument, executed in 2019, with the most recent amendment, dated December 2024, notarized and certified by Lawrence Beaumont, trustee of record. Judge Norwood picked up the document. She read the first page in full before she said anything. Ms. Beckett, she said, walk me through the protection clause. Carol walked her through every line. She explained the dual consent requirement, the self-executing freeze, the automated trustee notification. She pulled up the timestamp on the flag notification, August 14th, 2024, 3:47 p.m., and placed it beside Dr. Ford's report, confirming the mortgage was filed that same afternoon. The courtroom was very quiet. Marcus Holt was no longer looking at his folder. He was looking at Preston, and Preston was looking at the document in Judge Norwood's hands, with an expression I had never seen on my son's face before. Not anger, not calculation, but something raw and cornered that he couldn't quite get under control. "Mr. Holt," Judge Norwood said, setting the document down, "your motion challenging Mrs. Grayson's capacity in February is noted. However, the trust instrument before me was amended in December 2024, 1 month before the letter in question, by the same woman through the same estate attorney with full notarization." She removed her glasses. "That is not the work of someone with diminished capacity." She looked at him steadily. "Your motion is denied." Holt's jaw tightened. "Your Honor, denied, Mr. Holt." Her voice didn't rise a single degree. "We will resume with petitioner's next witness on Monday morning." I walked out of that courtroom into the gray November air and stood on the stone steps for a long moment, breathing. Theo came up beside me. Carol appeared on my other side, already checking her phone, already 3 steps ahead. "Monday," she said. "Vivien Grayson takes the stand." My head came up fast. "Vivien is testifying." Carol looked at me over the top of her phone. "She called my office yesterday morning," she said. "Apparently, she has things to say that she can no longer keep to herself." She slid the phone into her pocket. "Get some rest this weekend, Walter. Monday is going to change everything." I looked out at the Harrisburg skyline, gray stone and bare November trees, and felt something tighten in my chest. That was not grief and not dread. It was almost over. Ellie had built this from a hospital bed piece by piece, and it was almost over. Before I tell you what happened inside that courtroom on Monday morning, I want you to do something for me. Type "still here" in the comments. That's all. 2 words. Because what this woman was about to say in front of that judge about her own husband is the moment this entire story turns inside out. You've stayed with Walter through the funeral, the forged signatures, the locked trust, the courtroom. You've earned what comes next. Quick note: portions of this story include fictional elements added for narrative impact. Names, locations, and certain details are coincidental and not intended to reflect any specific individual. But the truth this story is built around, that part doesn't need any embellishment. Monday came in cold and clear, the kind of November morning where the sky is a hard, brittle blue, and the light has no warmth in it at all. I arrived at the courthouse 40 minutes early and sat in my car in the parking garage, with both hands on the wheel, not ready to go in and not willing to stay out. Vivien Grayson was already in the building when I walked into the corridor outside Judge Norwood's courtroom. She was standing near the far window, 35 years old, still and pale, wearing a plain charcoal coat, with her hair pulled back tight. She had the look of someone who had made a decision that cost them everything and was not going back on it. She saw me and crossed the corridor. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her chin steady. "Walter," she said. Her voice was hoarse, like she'd been awake for days. "I need you to know I didn't know about the hospital. I didn't know what he showed Ellie. I knew about the LLC and I knew the money was coming from somewhere it shouldn't. But I didn't know about your signature or the will until Gerald Foss's name came up in the court filings." She pressed her lips together hard. "When I read the filing, I called Carol that same night. I looked at my daughter-in-law, this woman who had sat across from me at Christmas dinners, who had brought Ellie flowers when she was first diagnosed, and I felt the complicated, grinding weight of a situation where the person in front of you is both complicit and telling the truth. "You should have come to me sooner," I said. "Yes." Her voice didn't waver. "I should have. I'm sorry, Walter." Her eyes filled fast, and she blinked hard against it. "I'm going to tell them everything I know." She turned and walked toward the witness room before I could answer. Carol met me at the plaintiff's table with coffee and a look that said she had already processed everything and was ready for what came next. "She's prepared," Carol said quietly. "I spoke with her for 3 hours on Saturday. She's credible, she's detailed, and she's terrified, and that combination reads very well to a jury and a judge." Across the room, Preston walked in with Holt. The moment Preston's eyes found Vivien's empty seat at the gallery, something in his expression cracked open, and then sealed shut again, fast and deliberate. He leaned to Holt and said something in a sharp, clipped undertone. Holt put a hand on his arm. Judge Norwood entered. The room rose. The room sat. "Petitioner calls Vivien Grayson," Carol said. Vivien walked to the stand with her chin up and her hands clasped in front of her, the walk of a woman who was terrified and doing it anyway. She settled into the chair, adjusted the microphone, and looked out at the courtroom with eyes that were bright and wet and completely resolved. Carol began carefully establishing Vivien's identity, her marriage to Preston, her knowledge of the family finances. Then she moved in. "Mrs. Grayson," Carol said, "are you familiar with the LLC registered under the name Grayson Capital Partners?" "Yes." Vivien's voice was clear and steady. "Preston formed it in February 2024. He told me it was a holding company for a real estate investment opportunity. He said his parents had agreed to be passive investors." "Did you believe him?" Vivien's jaw worked for a moment. "I wanted to," she said. "I asked him once to show me the agreement, the one where Walter and Ellie had signed on. He said he'd pull it up later. He never did." She looked down at her folded hands, then back up. "I stopped asking. When did you first suspect the investment story was not accurate?" "October 2024. Vivien's voice tightened. "Preston came home late from a meeting in Philadelphia. He was elated, isn't quite the right word. Wound up. He said the refinancing had gone through, and the capital was transferred. I asked what refinancing. He said, the house on Dunmore Road. I asked if Walter knew, and he said, it's handled." Her voice dropped. "It's handled." That's what he said. Preston's hands were flat on the table. Every muscle in his body looked taut enough to snap. Carol moved closer to the stand. "Mrs. Grayson, did Preston ever discuss the updated will with you?" "Yes." A single tear broke loose and ran down her cheek. She didn't wipe it. "After Ellie passed, he said she'd finally done the right thing by the family, that she'd made sure he was protected." Her voice cracked hard on the next words. "He said it like it was something she'd wanted, like it was a gift." A sob pushed up through her chest, and she pressed her fist against her mouth for a moment, fighting it back. "I didn't know then that he'd pressured her. I thought, God help me, I thought she'd chosen it." "When did you learn the truth?" Carol asked. "When I read Carol's court filing." Vivien lowered her fist. Her voice was rough and unsteady, but she kept going. "I read about the forged signature on the authorization document, the one he showed Ellie in the hospital to make her believe Walter had agreed." She turned and looked directly at Preston for the first time since she'd taken the stand. Her eyes were streaming now, her voice shaking with the effort of holding it together. "He went into that hospital room with flowers and a piece of paper with a forged signature, and he told a dying woman that her husband had already agreed. She believed him because she trusted him. She was his mother." The courtroom was absolutely still. Even the bailiff near the door had gone completely rigid. Preston's face had drained of all color. He was staring at the table in front of him. Holt was writing something rapidly on his legal pad, jaw clenched. "Mrs. Grayson," Carol said gently, "is there anything else you believe the court should know?" Vivien straightened in the chair. She wiped both cheeks with the back of her hand in one firm stroke and looked at Judge Norwood directly. "Preston has been running Grayson Capital Partners as a personal account since August 2024, she said. "The transfers from the mortgage equity went in. Only a portion of those funds remain. I have the bank statements." She reached into the folder she'd brought with her to the stand Carol had told her she could, and pulled out a clean white envelope. "I printed them on Saturday. I'd like to submit them as evidence." Judge Norwood looked at her for a long moment. "Bailiff, please collect that from the witness." The bailiff walked forward. The envelope changed hands. Holt rose from his chair. "Your Honor, I must object to the introduction of documents not previously disclosed." Note your objection, Mr. Holt. Judge Norwood was already opening the envelope. It is noted. She read the first page of the bank statements with the unhurried focus of a woman who had not missed a relevant detail in 20 years on the bench. Then she set the papers down and looked across the courtroom at Preston Grayson. Preston looked back at her. For one long, exposed moment, there was nowhere left for him to perform. "We'll recess until tomorrow morning," Judge Norwood said. 9 o'clock. Mr. Holt, I strongly suggest you and your client use this afternoon productively. I looked at Vivien as she stepped down from the stand. Her legs were shaking. I could see it from where I sat. The fine tremor in her knees as she walked. She made it back to the corridor, and I heard her, the moment the door swung shut behind her, a broken, gasping sob that she had held inside through every word of that testimony. I sat very still at the plaintiff's table, with my hands pressed flat and my eyes burning, and I thought about Ellie in her hospital room and the flowers and the forged piece of paper, and I thought tomorrow it ends. Tuesday came in the same cold blue as Monday, but sharper, the kind of December morning where the air has edges. I drove to Harrisburg alone this time. Theo had offered to come, but I told him to stay home. This part I needed to sit through by myself with my own hands folded and my own jaw held still. Carol was waiting at the courthouse steps, coat buttoned to the collar, briefcase in hand. She looked at me the way a person looks at someone they're genuinely worried about, direct and careful at the same time. "How are you this morning?" she asked. "Ready," I said. "Good." She fell into step beside me. Because today, Devon Marsh takes the stand, and Marcus Holt is going to do everything in his power to discredit him. Holt will argue that Devon's testimony is motivated by personal grievance, that he's a man with a grudge, not a credible witness. I need you to let that argument land without reacting. "I've been letting things land without reacting for 3 months, I said. Carol almost smiled. Then today should be manageable. The courtroom felt different from Monday, heavier, more compressed, as if the walls had moved a few inches closer overnight. The gallery had filled up 2 journalists in the back row, a woman from the county DA's office who had been attending quietly since the second hearing, and Norma Whitfield, who had driven herself to Harrisburg without telling me, and was sitting 3 rows back in her good wool coat, with her hands folded and her chin at a resolute angle. When I caught her eye, she gave me a nod that said, "I'm here and you're not alone," without a single word. My throat tightened so fast I had to look away. Preston arrived with Holt 2 minutes before Judge Norwood took the bench. Preston's posture had changed, no longer the studied ease of a man in control, but something more careful and rigid, like a structure reinforcing itself against an anticipated load. He sat. He did not look at the gallery. Judge Norwood entered. We rose. We sat. "Petitioner calls Devon Marsh," Carol said. The man who walked to the stand was 40 years old, medium build, with the quiet steadiness of someone who had been through a fire and rebuilt everything from the ash up. He wore a plain, dark suit and moved without any performance. No bravado, no visible nerves, just the deliberate pace of a man who had decided exactly what he was going to say and was going to say it. He settled into the witness chair and adjusted his posture, spine straight, hands flat on his knees, and looked out at the courtroom with dark, level eyes. Carol approached. "Mr. Marsh, please describe your professional relationship with Preston Grayson." Devon's voice was steady and clear. "I worked as a junior analyst at Meridian Capital Group in Philadelphia from 2011 to 2013. Preston Grayson was a fund manager in my division. He was my direct supervisor for the last 14 months of my employment. And can you describe the nature of your professional interactions during that period?" At first they were normal. Devon shifted slightly in his chair. He was sharp, knowledgeable, good at reading people. I admired him initially. That changed in the spring of 2012 when he brought me into what he described as a routine fund restructuring project. His jaw tightened. He gave me a memo authorizing a series of internal transfers across 3 sub-accounts. The memo bore the signature of a senior partner, a man named Raymond Collier, who was one of the firm's founders. Preston told me Collier had authorized the transfers personally, and that my job was simply to execute them in the system. "Did you question the transfers?" Carol asked. "I did." Devon's voice tightened. The amounts were structured just under the automatic reporting threshold, always just under. I'd learned enough by then to recognize that pattern. I asked Preston directly if Collier had actually signed off. He looked me in the eye and said, "Devon, do you think I'd hand you something that wasn't clean?" A short, humorless sound escaped him. I was 24. I trusted him. I executed the transfers. What happened when the internal audit team flagged the accounts? Devon breathed in through his nose. When he exhaled, his voice was quieter, not broken, but weighted. Preston called me into his office the morning the audit team arrived. He shut the door. He said, "This is going to come back to the analyst who executed the transfers. That's how these things work. I'll take care of you, I promise." He said it like he was doing me a favor. His hands tightened on his knees. 2 days later, I was terminated. My securities license was suspended. Preston gave a statement to the audit team, saying he had no direct knowledge of the transfers, that I had been operating outside my authorized scope. Devon's eyes went hard and bright. Raymond Collier's signature on that memo was a forgery. Preston had forged it. I didn't know that until Gerald Foss showed me the forensic analysis 9 months ago. The courtroom was very still. In the row behind me, I heard Norma draw a sharp breath. Marcus Holt rose for cross-examination with the energy of a man who had prepared hard for this moment. "Mr. Marsh," he said, "isn't it true that you signed a settlement agreement in 2013 that included a non-disclosure clause?" "Yes," Devon said. "The NDA expired in 2021. And isn't it true that you suffered significant professional damage as a result of the 2013 investigation, damage you directly attribute to Preston Grayson?" "Yes." "So you carry a personal grievance against my client that directly motivates your testimony here today." Devon looked at Holt for a moment, with an expression that was neither anger nor defensiveness, but something far quieter and more devastating. "Mr. Holt," he said, "I have 2 daughters. They're 8 and 11. I coach the older one's soccer team on Saturday mornings. I rebuilt my career from nothing, and I am proud of what I built." He paused. "I'm not here because I'm angry. I'm here because when I read the court filing and saw the words forged signature on an authorization document, I recognized the method. Exactly the method. Same structure, same approach, same language." His voice dropped. "He did to Ellie Grayson what he did to me, except she was dying in a hospital bed, and I was just 24 and stupid enough to trust him." He looked directly at Preston. "That's why I'm here." Preston was staring at the table in front of him. His hands were pressed flat and perfectly still, the stillness of a man holding himself together by sheer will. Holt had no follow-up question. He sat down. Judge Norwood made a note on her legal pad. The DA's representative in the gallery leaned forward and wrote something of her own. Carol rested her case at 11:15. She walked back to our table and sat down, and I leaned toward her. "Is it enough?" I asked, my voice low. She looked at me steadily. "It was enough an hour ago," she said. "But the day isn't finished yet. This afternoon, the police will be executing a search warrant on Preston's home office." She set her pen down. "And I have reason to believe they'll find something we didn't expect." My chest tightened. "What kind of something?" Carol looked at me with an expression I couldn't fully read, part professional caution, part something almost like grief. "Something Preston wrote," she said, "and never sent." Carol called me at 7:15 that evening. I was at the kitchen table with a bowl of soup I hadn't touched, and Ellie's notebook open in front of me because some nights it was the only company that felt honest. "They found it," Carol said. I set my spoon down. "The letter." "Yes." A pause. "Walter, I need to read you something." "Are you sitting down?" I'm sitting. She read it to me over the phone. A letter on Meridian Capital Group letterhead, undated, handwritten on both sides in Preston's tight, controlled script. The police had found it in a locked drawer in his home office, folded inside a manila envelope addressed to me. It had never been sealed. It had never been sent. Carol read slowly and carefully. I listened with both hands wrapped around the soup bowl for warmth, because the kitchen had gone very cold, or I had. Preston had written, "Dad, I've started this letter 11 times and never finished it. I don't know if I ever will. I want you to understand something, not as an excuse because I know there isn't one, but because I need you to know it existed. I have never felt like enough. Not in your garage, not at the dinner table, not at any point in 38 years when you were building something with your hands, and I was standing next to you not knowing how. You never said I wasn't enough. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying I could never figure out how to be what you were, so I stopped trying to build things and started trying to own them instead. I know what I did. I know what I did to Mom. I knew the moment I left that hospital room. I told myself it was for the family. I told myself that so many times I almost believed it. I didn't believe it. I want you to know I didn't believe it." Carol stopped reading. The kitchen was very quiet. The soup in front of me had gone cold. "He knew," I said. My voice came out hollow and strange. "He walked out of that hospital room and he knew exactly what he'd done." "Yes," Carol said quietly. I pressed my free hand over my eyes. The burning behind them was immediate and deep, not quite grief, not quite anger, but the specific awful pain of understanding something you can never unknow. My son had stood in his mother's hospital room with forged papers and flowers, and he had walked out, knowing. He had gone home to Vivien and had dinner and gone to sleep in his bed, and he had known. "Walter," Carol said, "I need you to hear the rest." I lowered my hand. "Go ahead." She read, "I don't expect forgiveness. I'm not writing this to ask for it. I'm writing because I think you deserve to know that there is a part of me, small, maybe smaller than it should be, that is ashamed. Not afraid of the consequences. Ashamed. Mom would know the difference. She always knew the difference. I hope wherever she is, she doesn't have to see this part. I hope she only remembers the good years when I was small enough that love was simple. Your son, Preston," Carol finished. Neither of us spoke for a moment. "He wrote it," I said finally, "and then he locked it in a drawer." "Yes, he was ashamed enough to write it down and not enough to stop." "Yes, Walter." Carol's voice was very gentle. "That is exactly right." I stood up from the table and walked to the kitchen window. Outside, the December night was clear and black and salted with stars. The maples along Dunmore Road had lost every leaf. They stood bare and skeletal against the sky, all structure, and no softness, exactly what winter makes of things. "What happens to the letter?" I asked. "It's evidence," Carol said. "It will be entered into the record. It corroborates the timeline and establishes that Preston had knowing intent, that this was not a misunderstanding or a well-meaning decision that went wrong, but a deliberate act carried out with full awareness." She paused. "The DA's representative was at the courthouse today, Walter. She's been building a parallel criminal case. The letter combined with Devon's testimony, the forensic mortgage analysis, and Vivien's bank statements gives her what she needs to file charges." "Criminal charges," I said. "Wire fraud. Forgery. Elder financial abuse." Carol's voice was measured but firm. "Pennsylvania takes elder financial abuse seriously. The sentencing guidelines are significant." I stayed at the window for a long moment. The bare maples, the black sky. "Carol," I said, "do I have to hate him?" A pause. When she answered, her voice had lost its professional precision and become something more human and more tired. "No," she said. "You don't have to feel anything in particular about him. That's yours to work out in your own time. He was my son for 38 years, I said. The rest was his choice, not mine. My throat tightened around the words. I used to take him into the garage when he was 5. He'd sit on that stool and hand me nails, and he thought that was the greatest thing in the world. He'd say, "Dad, are we building something?" And I'd say, "We're always building something, bud." My voice broke on the last word, and I pressed my lips together hard, breathing through my nose until I could continue. I don't know when he stopped believing that. Walter. Carol's voice was careful and full. That is not your failure. You understand that. I know, I said. I know it up here. I pressed my fingers against my temple. The rest of me is still working on it. That's allowed, she said. Take the time you need, but I need you back in that courthouse on Thursday morning. Judge Norwood is ready to rule. Thursday, 2 days. I looked out at the bare maples and the December stars and thought about a 5-year-old boy on a wooden stool handing his father nails. I thought about how long it takes to build something and how fast it comes down, and how sometimes the person doing the damage is someone you taught to hold a hammer. I'll be there Thursday, I said. I know you will, Carol said. Good night, Walter. I hung up and stood at the window for a long time. The cold came through the glass in a slow, steady press. Behind me on the table, Ellie's notebook sat open, her handwriting, her careful fury, her love laid out in green spiral pages. I turned away from the window, picked up the notebook, and held it against my chest with both arms, the way you hold something you are not willing to put down. Thursday, I told the empty kitchen. Then it's done. Thursday arrived the way all hard days arrive, without ceremony, without warning, that this was the day everything would break one way or the other. I woke at 5 in the morning, dressed in the dark, and sat at the kitchen table until the light came up gray and thin through the window over the sink. I made coffee. I didn't drink it. Theo picked me up at 7:30. He was wearing his good jacket, the charcoal one he'd worn to Ellie's funeral, and he had combed his hair with the deliberate care of a man marking an occasion. He looked at me when I came down the porch steps and said nothing, just nodded once and I nodded back, and we got in the truck. Norma was already in the courthouse gallery when we arrived. Same wool coat, same resolute chin. Carol was at the plaintiff's table with 3 folders arranged in a precise row. She looked up when I walked in, and something in her face told me she already knew how this was going to go. Not arrogant certainty. The particular certainty of a woman who had done everything right and knew it. "How are you?" she asked. "Ask me in an hour," I said. Across the room, Marcus Holt arrived without Preston. I turned to Carol. "Where is he?" Carol's expression didn't shift. "His counsel has advised him not to be present for the ruling," she said. "That tells you something." It told me everything. Judge Patricia Norwood entered at 9 o'clock exactly. The room rose. The room sat. She settled her reading glasses on her nose, opened the file in front of her, and looked out over the courtroom with the measured, unimpressed gaze of a woman who had heard every argument twice and been moved by only the ones that deserved it. "I have reviewed the complete record in this matter," she began. "The petitioner has presented forensic document analysis, sworn testimony from 3 independent witnesses, a certified trustee report, authenticated financial records, and a letter written by the deceased, Mrs. Eleanor Grayson, detailing the circumstances under which she was induced to alter her will and sign a refinancing document." Judge Norwood paused and looked at Holt. "The respondent has offered procedural objections and a challenge to witness credibility. He has not offered a single piece of affirmative evidence contradicting the substance of the petitioner's case." Holt shifted in his chair but said nothing. "On the matter of the August 2024 mortgage refinancing against the property at 412 Dunmore Road, Mill Haven," Judge Norwood continued, "I find that the petitioner's signature on that document is fraudulent as established by Dr. Raymond Ford's forensic analysis to a reasonable degree of scientific certainty. The refinancing is hereby voided in its entirety." The equity extracted under that instrument, $180,000, is ordered returned to the estate within 60 days, with interest calculated from the date of disbursement. My hands were flat on the table. Carol's pen was moving steadily. On the matter of the updated will filed by Marcus Holt, on behalf of Eleanor Grayson, in February 2025. Judge Norwood said, I find that the will was executed under fraudulent inducement. The sworn testimony of Vivien Grayson, corroborated by the letter of Eleanor Grayson, and the time-stamped photographic evidence provided by Norma Whitfield establishes that Mrs. Grayson was presented with a forged authorization document and induced to believe her husband had consented to the change. She removed her glasses. The updated will is hereby voided. The original will filed in 2018, leaving the estate equally to Walter Grayson, is reinstated as the governing instrument. The room was completely still. Furthermore, Judge Norwood said, replacing her glasses and looking back at her notes, I am referring this matter to the Dauphin County District Attorney's Office for criminal review. The pattern of conduct established across multiple witnesses' jurisdictions and time periods, including the corroborating testimony regarding Meridian Capital Group, constitutes sufficient grounds for that referral. She looked up one final time. Mr. Holt, your client has 60 days to comply with the financial restitution order. I strongly recommend he begin that process immediately. Holt gathered his papers. His movements were controlled and expressionless, the professional composure of a man absorbing a loss he had known was coming since Monday. Judge Norwood closed her file. This matter is adjourned. The gavel came down. Behind me, Norma made a sound sharp and broken halfway between a sob and something fiercer than that. I heard Theo exhale beside me, long and slow, like a man releasing something he had been holding for 9 months. Carol set her pen down and turned to me. Her eyes were bright. Not tearful bright the way eyes get when something that should have happened finally does. Walter, she said. I couldn't speak for a moment. My throat had closed completely, and my eyes were burning with the kind of heat that builds slowly and arrives all at once. I pressed both fists against the table and breathed one breath too until my voice came back. She did it, I said. My voice cracked clean through on the last word. Ellie did it. She did, Carol said quietly. Every piece of it. Theo put both hands on my shoulders from behind and gripped hard the grip of a man who had no words left either and wasn't going to pretend otherwise. I reached up and covered one of his hands with mine and held on. Norma leaned forward from the row behind me and pressed her hand briefly against my arm. She knew, Norma said, her voice rough and full. She always knew Walter. I sat in that courtroom for a long moment, after the gallery began to empty, set with the ruling hanging in the air around me like something tangible, like something I could breathe in and keep. The charcoal suit, the wooden bench, the December light coming through the high windows. Ellie had built this from a hospital bed in January, with trembling hands and a green notebook, and a woman named Carol Beckett she had trusted absolutely. She had not been wrong. Carol drove me to her office after the ruling. I didn't ask why, I simply got in the car, because my legs felt like something structural had gone out of them, and the passenger seat was where I needed to be. Lawrence Beaumont was already there. I had spoken to Lawrence once before, briefly by phone, Ellie's uncle's estate attorney, the trustee of record for the Clearwater Ridge Family Protective Trust. A man from Pittsburgh who wore reading glasses on a beaded chain and had the quiet, unhurried patience of someone accustomed to delivering news that required time to absorb. He stood when I walked in and shook my hand with both of his, the way people do when they mean it. Mr. Grayson, he said, congratulations on today's ruling. Please sit down. We have some business to discuss. I sat. Carol sat across from me. Lawrence opened a leather portfolio and spread 3 documents across the conference table, with the organized care of a man who had arranged this moment many times in his head before it arrived. The Clearwater Ridge Family Protective Trust. Lawrence began, was established in 2019 following the death of Raymond Ellsworth Dunmore. Mrs. Grayson was the primary beneficiary of Mr. Dunmore's estate. The trust was structured as a protective vehicle designed specifically to shield the inherited assets from unauthorized access or transfer. He adjusted his glasses. As you are now aware, the unauthorized mortgage filing in August 2024 triggered the trust's protection clause and froze all affiliated accounts automatically. That freeze has remained in place pending the resolution of today's legal proceedings. And now that the proceedings are resolved, I asked, the freeze lifts as of today. Lawrence reached for the first document. The current valuation of the Clearwater Ridge Trust as of this morning's market close is $17.4 million. He slid the document across to me. You are the named beneficiary, Walter. These assets are yours. I looked at the number on the page. $17.4 million. I looked at it the way you look at something that doesn't belong to the same world as the rest of your morning. The early alarm, the cold coffee, the charcoal suit, the courtroom. She never told me, I said. My voice came out rough and wondering. 40 years. She never said a word. Lawrence nodded gently. She was advised to maintain confidentiality during the estate settlement period. And then, as she wrote in her letter, the years passed. She told me in January, when she came to update the beneficiary designation, that she had always intended to tell you properly, that she wanted it to be a conversation, not a document. His voice softened. She said Lawrence Gray deserves to hear it from me, not from a piece of paper. She ran out of time. My eyes went hot and wet so fast I couldn't prepare for it. I pressed the heel of my hand against my mouth and held it there for a count of 5, breathing through my nose, keeping myself from coming apart in a conference room in Harrisburg on a Thursday afternoon. Carol reached across the table and put her hand over mine. She didn't say anything. She just held it there, warm and steady, until I lowered my hand. What do I do with it? I asked. My voice was still rough, but it was mine again. That, Lawrence said, is entirely your decision. I looked at the document. Then I looked out the window at the December sky, hard blue, same as it had been all week, the kind of blue that has no give in it. I thought about the garage, the cedar smell, the yellow birdhouse with the uneven roof. I thought about 5-year-old Preston on the wooden stool, handing me nails, asking, "Are we building something?" Dad, who I thought about all the things I had built with my hands over 68 years, and how none of them had lasted the way I intended, and how building things anyway is still the only answer I have ever known. I want to build something, I said. Carol raised her head. Lawrence looked at me. Ellie spent her life giving things to people who needed them, I said. Birdhouses for the elementary school, dinners for the neighbors, time for anyone who asked. My voice steadied as I spoke the way it always steadies when I know what I'm doing. I want to build a workshop, a real one, proper tools, proper space, proper instruction. For kids who don't have fathers, or whose fathers don't have time, or who've never once been handed a piece of wood and told you can make something out of this. I pressed my hands flat on the conference table. I want to call it the Ellie Grayson Workshop. Lawrence took his glasses off and held them in both hands for a moment. His eyes were bright. She would have argued with you about the name, Carol said. Her voice was full and unsteady. She would have said it was too much fuss. She would have, I agreed. And I would have told her she didn't get a vote on this one. My own voice broke on the last 3 words, and I let it. She gave me $17 million and a green notebook and 3 steps worth of plans I didn't even know she was making. The least I can do is put her name on a door. Lawrence set his glasses back on his nose. He reached for his pen. Then let's talk about how we make that happen, he said. Outside the window, the December sky held hard and blue and clear. No warmth yet, but the kind of light that comes before warmth does. The kind that says the worst of the cold is behind you. I picked up the pen. The DA filed charges on a Monday morning, 6 days before Christmas. Carol called while I was in the garage sanding a cabinet door, the kind of honest, ordinary work my hands had been craving for months. I set the sandpaper down and listened. Wire fraud, forgery of a legal instrument, financial exploitation of an older adult under Pennsylvania statute. Her voice was precise and steady. Preston was processed at 9:15. He posted bail by noon. I sat down on my wooden stool. My chest felt hollowed out, not relieved, not triumphant, just empty in a way that had nothing to do with winning. How long is he looking at? I asked. 7 to 14 years if convicted on all counts, Carol said. The evidentiary record is strong. A pause. Walter, are you all right? Ask me something easier, I said. Theo came over that evening without being asked. He brought a casserole, set it on the stove without a word, and sat across from me at the kitchen table with the steady, unhurried presence of a man who has known you for 37 years and knows exactly when to stop talking. Talk, he said. I don't know what I feel. My voice came out low and rough. He's going to stand in a courtroom and hear how many years he's going to lose, and all I feel is tired. I pressed both hands flat on the table. The worst part isn't what he did to me. It's what he did to Ellie. She was in that hospital bed, trying to protect everyone, including him, right until the end. My throat tightened, and he walked in with flowers. Theo's eyes went red at the rims. What are you going to do with all of it, the anger, the grief? Build something, I said. It's the only answer I've ever had. The workshop. The workshop. A small, involuntary smile crossed my face. I'm going to frame the doorway myself. 68 years old, and I don't care what my back says about it. Theo laughed, sudden and warm, the first real laugh this kitchen had heard since before the funeral. She'd stand there with her arms crossed and say, Gray, you're going to put your back out. And I'd say, Ellie, it's already out. What difference does it make? My voice cracked, and the laugh became something else entirely. Half grief, half the kind of love that has nowhere left to go. I pressed my wrist against my eyes and breathed hard. God, I miss her. I know, Theo said. I know you do. At 9 o'clock, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. Mr. Grayson, this is Vivien. I've filed for divorce. I'm taking the kids to Asheville. I'm sorry for everything I didn't do sooner. I typed back, take care of those kids. That's all that matters now. I set the phone down. Theo looked at me. Vivien, I said. She's leaving him. Theo nodded slowly. Good. Yes, I said. Good. Outside, the December wind moved through the bare maples with a sound like something being swept clean. Preston was out there somewhere tonight, the charges, the bail, the full weight of everything he had chosen arriving all at once. He had known the moment he left that hospital room. He had chosen anyway. I couldn't save him from that. I had stopped believing I could save him from himself. I just hadn't admitted it until now. Theo, I said, come with me to the Clover Street property tomorrow. I want to walk the space. His face opened into a full, warm smile. What time? 7, I said. Bring coffee. The Ellie Grayson workshop opened on the second Saturday of January 2026. Cold and bright, with frost on the windows and fresh sawdust already in the air before 8 o'clock. I had framed the main doorway myself. My back protested for 3 days exactly as Theo predicted, and I told him to keep his opinions to himself. He laughed until he had to sit down. The sign above the door was hand-carved oak, routed by hand over 4 December evenings, the way my father taught me slowly, correctly, without shortcuts. The Ellie Grayson workshop. For those who are learning to build. Norma arrived first, 20 minutes early, carrying a tin of cookies and wearing a yellow scarf the exact color of Ellie's last birdhouse. When she saw the sign, she stopped in the doorway and pressed both hands over her mouth, her shoulders shaking. Norma, I said, crossing to her, come inside, it's cold. It's beautiful. she managed, voice muffled behind her hands. Walter, it's just beautiful. It's a room with tools in it, I said. But my voice came out rough, so I put my arm around her shoulders and walked her in instead of finishing the sentence. Theo was already at the main workbench laying out tools, with the focused care of a man taking borrowed responsibility seriously. He grinned when we walked in. Walter, you're short one mallet. Back storage room, second shelf, I said. Already checked. Already ordered. He held up his phone. 12 minutes ago. I laughed, a real one from somewhere deep and uncomplicated. It filled the whole room. The first class started at 9. 8 kids ages 10 to 15, loud and uncertain the way kids are when they're deciding whether a new place is safe. They looked at the tools, the sawdust on the floor, the old man standing at the front, with his hands in his pockets. My name is Walter, I said. None of you have ever done anything wrong in here because you've never been here before. Whatever you think you can't do, we'll find out together. I picked up a piece of pine. Who wants to make a cut? Every hand went up, every single one. My eyes burned hot. I blinked it back and smiled. Good. Let's get to work. After the class ended, after Norma gave every kid a cookie, and 2 of them urgently asked when the next session was, I drove to Millhaven Cemetery alone. Ellie's grave sat on the eastern slope under a bare white oak. Someone Norma surely had left a small ceramic birdhouse on the headstone. Yellow, slightly uneven roof. I stood there with my hands in my coat pockets and talked to her out loud, without embarrassment, the way I had since September. The workshop opened today, I said. 8 kids. One of them picked up the hand plane like he'd been waiting his whole life for it. You would have been insufferably pleased with yourself. My voice caught. I breathed through it. I found your notebook. I found Carol. I found every piece you arranged from that hospital bed. A tear ran cold down my cheek, and I left it. You never told me about the money. I'm still a little angry. I think you knew I would be, which is why you wrote it in a letter instead of telling me to my face. I exhaled slowly. That was very like you. I pressed my fingers against the cold granite headstone. I'm going to be all right, Ellie. Not yet, but I'm going to be. I turned and walked back to the truck steadily, without rushing the way a man walks when he knows exactly where he is going. Behind me, the white oak spread its bare arms wide against the winter sky, still standing without apology, without end. People ask me sometimes how I survived it. The grief, the betrayal, the months of watching everything I thought I knew come apart at the seams. My answer is always the same. I didn't survive it alone. God has a way of leaving exactly what you need in exactly the right place, a green notebook behind a paint can, a neighbor with a time-stamped photograph, a lawyer who answered on the second ring. I didn't find those things by accident. I was meant to find them. If this family story taught me anything, it is this: the people who love you most often protect you in ways you won't understand until after they're gone. Ellie never made a single grand gesture. She made 100 quiet ones, and every one of them held. Here is my honest advice from one old man who learned the hard way: don't be like me. Don't wait until the notebook is hidden behind the paint cans to have the conversation. Don't assume the people under your roof share your values just because they share your name. Love fiercely, but keep your eyes open. My personal opinion. Loyalty is built in the ordinary days. Betrayal always announces itself early. We simply choose not to hear it. In every Grandpa Stories moment I have lived, the warning was always there. I was just too trusting to read it. These are the things I believe now at 68, standing in a workshop that smells like cedar and second chances. If this Grandpa Stories resonated with you, if you've ever sat in a hard chair in a courtroom, or held someone's handwriting long after they were gone, or built something just to keep moving, leave a comment below and tell me your story. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. And if you haven't already, subscribe, because the best family story is always the next one. Thank you truly for staying until the very end. One final note. The stories ahead contain some fictional elements crafted purely for storytelling and reflection. If that's not the content for you, no hard feelings. Step away, find what speaks to you, and take good care of yourself. For everyone else, I'll see you in the next chapter.